Halloween is considered a classic horror film, but for me, it's an alright slasher that is terribly overrated due to its impact on the genre. Halloween 2 improved the formula by advancing the story and upping the gore. Halloween 3 was strange and had nothing to do with the first two. Halloween 4 was just a big horror cliché. Halloween 5 just made no sense. And Halloween 6 pretty much takes all the flaws I just mentioned and puts them into a big blender. Except for the overrated part, because to my knowledge, a lot of Michael Myers fans feel the way I do about this colossal piece of garbage. Let's take a look at the plot. It starts out with an older Jamie Lloyd, this time played by J.C. Brandy, bearing no resemblance to Danielle Harris, as she's rushed to a medical room to give birth to her child. How did she become pregnant? We never find out, and the movie obviously doesn't give a shit. As soon as her child is born, though, he's carried away by a bunch of weirdos in cloaks, as they partake in some sort of Celtic ritual. They carve the symbol of the thorn on the baby, immediately trying to link this movie to the mysterious Man in Black introduced in Halloween 5. We're also given a narrator who basically goes on and on about how evil never dies.
You can lock it up, you can burn it and bury it and pray that it dies, but it never will.
Obviously taking his cues from a very tiresome Dr. Loomis. We find out soon after that Michael Myers is back, and after all this time is still trying to kill his niece, as well as her newborn baby. Jamie manages to escape, although Michael still manages to kill her friend. This isn't a violent death, but it's pretty sadistic, and is possibly the best death of the whole film. We're then briefly introduced to this film's half-assed protagonists, a woman named Kara and her son Danny, both of who are relatives of the people who adopted Laurie Strode. That's all good, but seriously, who cares? They're the people who adopted Laurie, not actual blood relatives, so why is Michael after them? Well, they do live in his house, so I guess that's good enough reason. And you know who's also in this film? An older Tommy Doyle, who we find out has quite an interest on the people across the street. As it turns out, somehow Tommy knows that Michael is coming home, and during a live radio broadcast he hears Jamie's plea for help and starts searching for Dr. Loomis. He winds up finding Jamie's baby, which she has now abandoned, and when trying to take him to a hospital, just happens to run into Dr. Loomis himself. And yes, for the umpteenth time, he is still giving his Michael Myers speeches.
This force, this thing that lived inside of him, came from a source too violent, too deadly for you to imagine. It grew inside him, contaminating his soul.
Couldn't they just make him a deaf mute in this film? It's getting really old by now. And seriously, as much respect as I have for Donald Pleasance, he has no business whatsoever being in this movie. He is absolutely useless. The characters drag him around like an unwanted canker sore, and even he doesn't seem to be very interested.
Barry, what happened to that psychiatrist of his, Loomis? I heard the old quack was dead.
What are you looking for?
Not dead.
Parole? You know, maybe
Just very much retired.
It must have been some paycheck. Loomis gets a visit from an old friend that we've never met before, Dr. Terrence Wynn, played by Lethal Weapon's Mitch Ryan. This is an interesting connection because Tom Atkins, the protagonist of Halloween 3, was also in Lethal Weapon. Anyway, Wynn's only purpose for now is to talk Loomis into coming out of retirement.
I don't want to practice medicine anymore.
Aside from that, he's also pretty useless. We switch back to the dysfunctional Strode family run by probably the biggest dickhead ever to grace a horror movie, John Strode. From beginning to end, he's a real nutjob, and he gives no excuses for it. He hates kids, he yells at his wife, he calls Danny a bastard in front of his mother, and then flat out slaps Kara in front of everyone. The problem with this is there is honestly no fitting way for this character to die. When Michael finally gets to him, we just don't feel justified. On the same token, his wife, played by Kim Darby, is so nurturing and so timid that we don't feel she deserves to die. Anyway, after going through its boring, routine paces of slash this, stab that, we finally get the origin of Michael Myers. It dates back to an ancient Celtic ritual where tribes would choose to put the curse of the thorn on one tribesman. This tribesman was then cursed to kill everyone in his family to regain his honor, or some crap like that. Now that's all fascinating, but it's not very thought out. I mean, if you really wanted to impress me, why don't you find some legitimate way of connecting this mythology to the first film? I mean, yeah, Tommy references Sam Hain, which Loomis talks about briefly in Halloween 2, but that's it. That's the only explanation we get. I have to say the concept is intriguing, but the film doesn't do anything interesting with it. Instead, we find out that Loomis's friend Wynn is actually the Man in Black, lame, and is the one guiding Michael Myers to Jamie's baby. It's confusing, contrived, and you're so glad when Michael finally kills these screwheads, because that means the movie's finally done being full of itself, and we can move on to the scene where Michael chases everyone in a dark, indoor environment. You know, like what they did in every movie before this one. The ending is really disappointing. As usual, they don't even kill Michael off, and as Mr. Pleasance's last movie before his passing, it's really embarrassing how they give him a send-off. Halloween, the Curse of Michael Myers. It's a curse that it got made. It's unsettling, unpleasant, takes itself too seriously, and is just really boring. Again, the story doesn't make a lot of sense, the kills are just average, Michael doesn't have a lot of screen time, honestly, and takes a backseat to the origin story. Seriously, Michael seems nothing more than a cultish lapdog doing everyone's bidding, and it discredits the character more than any other movie in the franchise. I also don't like how they give it that goth rock and roll feel. In the final scenes, his music is done through really heavy guitar riffs, and it's distracting and ridiculous. Long gone is the subtle John Carpenter theme. From beginning to end, this movie right here is what most critics probably think of when you mention the term slasher movie. Even if slashers aren't your thing in general, the best ones are pretty entertaining. They're often silly and lack any worthwhile value, sure, but they're candy for your brain. This one is just unpleasant. The characters, the cinematography, the over-the-top or even boring acting, and the lacking presence of Michael Myers just kills it. This is the first horror movie on my list, and hopefully the only one where I can honestly say steer clear, because it flat out sucks.
Really, you're too good to me.